Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to what I believe is our 43rd housing market update. And that goes back to the COVID days. And thank goodness we're out of that. But it's always something, isn't it? And we're going to talk about that today. And one of the things that we hope you'll do as you think through your organization, call us if you need help. I don't care if it's the for sale or rental side, building product manufacturing, anything rental, build to rent. We'll talk about that today, by the way, but we're here to help. So just know we've got your back. And with that, we've also got a wide variety of data solutions. I think you all know this. I just like to remind you because we continue to upgrade and expand the work that we're doing. Note that you can get a free market snapshot. Just jump on to our website, look up market snapshot, pull down one from your favorite market or a market you're thinking about, and take it with our compliments. Note that we have some new publications coming up and new products that will be through our building product manufacturing, rental housing, and now national outlook. This is Economic and Housing Insights. Allie and her team, supported by advisory, will be putting this out. And just keep an eye out for it because we're doing this to keep the conversation going, much like we do with HMU, but it will be more often and accessible. Ultimately, you know that we're constantly expanding our coverage. It helps us understand the markets. Look at the places we've recently added: Richmond, Columbia, South Carolina, Spartanburg, Oklahoma City, Greenville, Anderson, and Augusta. Know that we continue to move that. And we love the idea of frictionless. And UTour, which is now part of our suite of services, allows a home shopper the frictionless access to a home that they might buy. So know that the home shoppers can ultimately self-tour. UTour is such a cool weapon when you're trying to sell homes, and it improves your conversion rate. It's a pretty cool deal there. And you'll hear Ellie and I reference a couple of events that we've just recently completed, but we always want to make sure you know the events because this is where we pull together the data and what we learn on the advisory side, and then we engage with you. And we always learn from you guys, and we hope we can return the favor in all these upcoming events: Dealmakers, Builder 100, and Future Place. Please join us at any and all of them. And I want to give a major shout out to Westwood Insurance Agency. They are our sponsors today, and they have been trusted by the major home builders in the industry for 7 decades. They're good people. We've worked with them often. And note the summary here. You know, if you work with Westwood Insurance Agency, these guys, they'll make you happy. Look at the customer service scores and the net promoter scores, and they help customers save on the home insurance. It's a pretty sweet deal. They're easy to work with, and they save you money. To me, that's a win-win-win. All right, so the agenda today. Oh, wait, whoa, go back there. Hold on. The agenda that Allie and I will share with you is shown here. We're going to do our classic economic backdrop, talk a little bit about the market. Allie's going to dive into migration and buyers. I'll talk about housing trends. Note that I'll give you guys an update on both the traditional rental market and BTR, and then, of course, we'll wrap up the way that we always do. Now, Allie, get ready, because here's the quick introduction. You all know that Allie is our chief economist. And she is a traveler through and through, personally and professionally. Over the last year, she's been in Africa and Egypt and even got a little escape to Cabo just recently. But note that on the professional side, Allie's been in 5 cities already this year. So that's in the first 29 days or 30 days that she could travel. And by Friday, she'll have spoken to 11 different organizations. So get an idea there. It's like every 3 days she's interacting with a new group. And Allie brings the interaction and what we learn from interacting with you in the variety of markets with the variety of groups that we work with. And she brings it back to the economics team. And keep in mind, with that economics team, we're expanding our published research. I want to give a shout out to Sean Fergus, who's been so helpful there. And Allie's going to bring to you today some of the new findings that we've had just this last month and how the market's shifting. There's good news. There's a few things to be careful of. But by far and away, I think as we look at 2024, there's more positives than negatives. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our chief economist to the stage, the one and only and my good friend, Allie Wolf.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. And hello, everyone. We are delighted that you're joining us for our 43rd housing market update. Now, as Tim mentioned, where I want to start is with the economic backdrop and really go back to this time last year when, if you remember, the prevailing sentiment, ourselves included, was that the US economy was going to fall into a recession in 2023. And as we know, that ultimately didn't happen. So, where I want to start today's presentation is by looking at where we began in 2023 and where we ended, because ultimately where we ended 2023 is where we're beginning this year. So let's start with what we've seen in the S&P 500. Using this as our proxy for stocks, we saw that last year we finished just below the record high set in 2022. In fact, the S&P 500 up 25% just last year. We'll talk about stocks a little bit later as it relates to different buyers. But if you look at the unemployment rate, we saw a 9% increase, getting our unemployment rate to 3.7%. Where this left us was still at the longest stretch with the unemployment rate under 4%, dating back to the 1960s. We had really good news emerge from the wages throughout last year. If you remember, we've talked in the past about how people had negative real wages, meaning they were falling behind every month because inflation was eating away at their income growth. Well, luckily, throughout last year, we saw a 50% reduction in inflation. The overall wage growth level had come down, but people were able to bring in more money than the rate of inflation. We're meeting here on Fed Day, so happy Fed Day to you. But as we look at this, we know that the Fed is still a little bit uncomfortable with inflation. We're going to see where their remarks stand for the current level. We'll talk about mortgage rates a little bit more later, but another big theme of 2023 was that we had more existing home price appreciation than new, which ultimately ended up being good for the new home space because this lowered the price spread between new and existing homes. Now, beyond all of that, we got recent data on US GDP. Remember, the broadest measure of overall economic growth. We grew 3.3% in the fourth quarter. So really solid backdrop that I think makes a lot of people ask the question, okay, so are we in the clear? Have we skirted that recession? And a lot of you are probably seeing headlines like this: recession? Not so fast, some say. Now, if you're looking at your screen, you probably can tell that that's Wall Street Journal fonts. But if you follow financial news, you may also recognize that Kelly Evans is not with the Wall Street Journal. She's with CNBC. That's because this was written in 2008. We do not believe we're repeating 2008. I show this just to emphasize how absolutely difficult it is to forecast the monetary policy's impact on the economy and what is known as those long and variable lags, the fact that it takes time to filter in. In fact, as we track out the economy, there have been some pretty big companies that have announced layoffs starting this year. You can see Macy's, Wayfair, UPS, Citi, Google. We're looking in some cases 10 to 20% of the overall workforce. So we still would say keep your eyes on the economy. Don't get complacent with where things are. But for now, economic backdrop still incredibly solid. Now, you think about that backdrop and you say, okay, well, why do we care about it in our industry? Now, we know we care about it partly because of what happens on the labor front can play into overall demand for housing. But we also know what happens in the economy is so important because it drives what happens to rates. Think about mortgage rates. Remember that trajectory we've been on, 2 to 8% interest rates in 3 years. And those 8% interest rates hit in October of last year when there was this idea that, hey, maybe the Fed can't actually slow the economy. And luckily, just a month later, investors were like, you know what? No, they are slowing the economy. Economy is no longer overheating. Good. And at least based on the data today, the economy is not on a fast track to a recession. Also good. And so where this leaves us in the market today is, depending on what day you look, interest rates are in the high 6s to low 7s. Now, we can celebrate that we're off that 8%. And I think what's important is there are some people that now have that mental threshold of, oh, 6% interest rates, at least they're not 8. But it doesn't change that when we talk to builders about the biggest hurdle with demand right now, the number one answer is current mortgage rates impacting affordability. Frankly, if you look at the top 5, all of these really go hand in hand. It's a combination of financial deterrence and mental deterrence. And so when we put out our builder survey, we do it mid-month every month. So Tim and I are able to provide you some mid-January takes of the market. What we said was, what sense do you get from consumers about their sentiment to start the year? And here are some of the responses. We're seeing some good things like the sideline. People that were on the sidelines are starting to jump back into the market. It's a bit of a mixed bag because rates are still high, but at least they're semi-stable. Look at this bottom comment. Seasonal home shoppers seem ready, willing, and mostly able to buy. So there was some shift in that consumer sentiment that we've captured at the beginning of the year, but still this focus on people want to buy, but affordability and qualifying remains the top challenge. And so our team wanted to understand this. We said, okay, let's get a sense of what affordability looks like. And big shout out to John Mazzaros on the econ department for running some of these scenarios with me. But we basically said, what could make the housing market affordable again? And I think your question is, well, what does affordable mean? We chose 2019 as that healthy pre-pandemic time. We'll talk about it a little bit later. This is probably not a perfect measure because we know in 2020, 21, 22, 23, and even early 24, we're still selling homes. So 2019 is probably not perfect, but I just wanted to give some context around that. So if we wanted to see affordability get back to 2019 levels, we would need to see a 45% drop in home prices or an additional 18% increase in incomes, or the 30-year fixed rate mortgage go down to 1.75%. Now, as we're looking at this, we're saying those 3 things would happen in isolation. We know that's not how the market works. Those are kind of your extreme examples of how you could get that affordability level back. But what we wanted to do is say, all right, we know it's probably not going to just be one of those 3. You kind of need to see a combination of things change. Well, let's provide a little bit of context. Since 2019, if you look at household incomes, they've risen by roughly 13%. So that 18 that you see on the left is an additional, it's not 18 minus 13, it's an additional 18% increase. So we know that incomes have risen, which is good. But we also talked about how there have been costs that have eaten into that. But let's assume that the household could put all of their after-tax income towards housing. So that increase, they can take all of that increase, put it towards housing. With interest rates at today's level, you would need to see prices go down 23% to match 2019 levels of affordability. Okay, let's say the household can put all of their after-tax income towards housing and mortgage rates are at 5%. Now, this doesn't have to be the market interest rate is at 5%. We know a lot of builders are willing and able to offer rates at that 5% level. Well, then prices would just need to drop 7%, which I would say we're seeing this scenario play out, that with higher incomes, with mortgage rate buydowns, consumers are still, in some instances, willing and able to make the math work. The challenges, as I put this together, I said, well, we've also seen inflation. I'm not sure people can put all of their increase in income towards housing because everything else has gotten expensive over the same period as well. So then I said, okay, what if a household could put 50% of their after-tax income towards housing and mortgage rates stayed the same today? So you're still in a pretty tough place with prices. Prices would need to drop 34% to match 2019 levels. What about if a household could put 50% of their after-tax towards housing and rates were at 5%? It's still actually a pretty steep change that would need to be required. But again, as I went through this, we're assuming 2019 is that benchmark. It's not the end all be all for affordability, But one of my big takeaways as I ran through those scenarios is it's gonna take a lot of movement in some combination of prices changing, of rates changing, of incomes changing, of wealth changing. But another key thing that stood out to me is we're talking about affordability and we're saying, how do we solve for it? When does it get better? And I think as I was running those situations, it was like, you know what? Housing affordability is going to be, it's almost our new normal in today's backdrop. So it's incumbent on us to figure out how can we still be successful despite that as one of the big headwinds. Another key takeaway, though, was thinking about the advantage the new home market has with this kind of backdrop. Not only the mortgage rate buydowns that can literally turn back time on affordability by bringing the rates lower, but I'd say more importantly, what builders and what the development community can do is instead of saying, hey, we need a 20% wide system-wide drop in prices to restore affordability, we can impact affordability on a case-by-case, community-by-community basis. The benefit the new home market has right now is through changes in home size. We know that's happening in real time. Changes in the type of homes constructed, the location of where these homes are constructed, and ultimately over time, hopefully a little compression of the input costs, we can impact that average sales price without it being a system-wide, a whole market-wide drop. It becomes more of a community-wide solution to some of the problems that we're looking at. So as I went through that scenario, though, I'd say one other thing that stood out to me is, no duh, existing home sales are down at the lowest level they've been since 1995. When you run those numbers, it can make sense why a lot of buyers are really struggling. When you look at existing home sales nationally, down 30% from 2019, basically there aren't any markets across the country that are really outperforming. Most existing home markets still down year over year and down from 2019. We've talked about this time and time again about the reasons behind it. Part of it is affordability and confidence. Like we said, those are the two kind of hand-in-hand challenges that we're dealing with, but also inventory. As we look at active listings, we said new existing home sales down 30% from 2019, active listings down 30% from 2019. Now, we're about to publish a blog on Builder Online of our top 3 things to watch for the spring selling season, and active listings for us is absolutely number 1. Because we're coming from this environment where we could say the blanket statement of active listings are down. But now what we're finding is what's happening with resale housing supply has become a very localized discussion. If you're in Austin, Salt Lake City, San Antonio, San Francisco, we're actually talking about inventory today that's above where it was in 2019. In Nashville, Phoenix, Tampa, Orlando, you're just off those 2019 levels. But look at the markets on the far right: Baltimore, New York, San Diego, Detroit, Vegas. We're talking a greater drop than what we see nationally, 40 to 50% below pre-pandemic times. This has become very much a local story. Now, if you're in one of the markets on the left and you're saying, okay, well, is more inventory good or is it bad? To answer that, you really have to ask, who are the sellers? If we're seeing active listings rise because investors are trying to offload their homes, they're increasing supply without increasing demand, they could pose a little bit of a challenge, especially to the new home market. But if we're seeing that listings are going up because there are people that have been putting their life on hold, and now they're saying it makes sense. I hate to reset my interest rate, but I can make the math work. I'm willing to move. You have increased supply, increased demand, in general, more mobility. And I don't think we should fear that. But let's look even further out. Big shout out to Chris from Inman, who is able to share this data on realtors, of what realtors expect to happen to their listing pipeline over the next 12 months. What I like about this data is we know that realtors are the boots on the ground. They're talking to people. They're getting a sense of people saying, oh, I'm getting a bit eager to move. I'm sick of waiting, whatever it might be. What the data captures is 50% of realtors expect their listing pipelines to be up 12 months from now. And as I thought through why that might be the case, we already talked about sick of putting life on hold. We know that the demographics are supportive of big changes, of retirements, of having babies, of getting married. We know that the general thesis is that interest rates are more likely to be down by the end of this year than up. And as interest rates go down, that lowers the spread between the rate that someone is locked in at. And I think a big thing is we've talked in the past about the prisoner's dilemma. People not wanting to sell their home because there's nothing else on the market, and so then they don't sell and someone else doesn't sell. We think over time, as we do see a little bit more resale supply, but also the new home market continue to construct homes, you do have more supply in general that just helps some people feel a little bit less stuck, a little bit less resistant to going through with a move. Even with that, the backdrop though, as we thought about the key trend in 2023, it was that the new home market was outperforming. We anticipate that that idea of two different housing markets carries on into 2024. In fact, remember, we said existing home sales at the lowest level since 1995. Zonda's measure of new home sales up 11% in 23 over 2022. And if you think about why, to me, it's pretty clear. You have the difference of one, a little bit more inventory that's available, and two, the incentives that can really help address either people's fear of the market or people's financial concerns or stretch in today's market. This is looking at new home sales by month, by year. And I want you to just look at the purple line, that's 2023. Ultimately, what we're seeing is throughout 2023, spring selling season, all the way through August, this is when we had that outperformance, that better than expected activity. And if you remember, we called the end of 2023 that seasonality plus point in time. And you can see that in the data, 23, a little bit below 2019 in September, October, November. We basically finished last year exactly in line with 2019 levels. But we're sitting here last day of January. And so we want to know, okay, well, what's happening in more real time? Like I said, we have our builder survey where we talked to builders mid-month. And we said to builders, how is January shaping up relative to expectations? We like this. We're not looking, Zonda tracks total sales. We're trying to get a sense of that qualitative feedback. If you remember, when we were asking this in October, November, December, many builders saying demand was slower. Some of them worried, some of them saying, hey, it's just normal seasonality. So to me, not a surprise that January's shaping up a little bit better so far. But I say the general read was that so far the year has started better than expected. Here are some of the comments from the survey. We're seeing the first of the year surge a little earlier than normal. Good traffic, excellent conversion, great January. The market appears ready to buy again. So those were some of the optimistic themes that we had seen about where the market is today. But a big thing that was mentioned in the builder survey was this idea of stability in rates. So for consumers, they feel better if they can start searching for their home and they can qualify for, say, $500,000. Mortgage rates don't move too much so that by the time they find the home to buy, they can also still qualify for $500,000. That hasn't really been the case. We've seen so much mortgage rate instability over the past handful of months. So in general, that stability is allowing demand to improve a little bit, but a key theme is still not urgent, and consumers are motivated by the deals. We're seeing comments about people are looking for discounts, they're shopping for the lowest rate available. So while the general theme is optimism, when we asked builders to describe the market in 3 words or less, cautious was the #1 most used phrase. And it makes sense. We talked about affordability a little bit earlier. There's just those concerns about how sustainable is demand at today's pricing level. How sustainable is demand with today's interest rates? Which to me then really begs the question, who are the buyers? How can we at least start to address answering that question? Well, a lot of you know this at this point, but we've talked about how from 2014 up until recently, millennials were the #1 most active buyer. They lost share pretty notably in 2023, and boomers gained share. To me, this makes so much sense. We know that millennials are the largest living generation. Boomers are the second largest living generation, but boomers are number one for wealth. So if you look at the top three lines, those are anyone over 55. You can see they represent the largest share. And why this is important is what we were looking at earlier when we were talking about affordability is someone buying solely off of income. That's what we've talked about in the past. Those buying off of income and those buying off of wealth have very different abilities to continue to buy with higher interest rates or continue to buy with higher home prices. We've talked about this at length before, but we know equities and equity is so important to some buyers. Equities, think back to the S&P 500 being up 25% last year. Equity is the extent to which home prices have gone up, not just since the pandemic, but for those that have lived in their home for a long time. And oh, by the way, they're probably looking to move down versus move up. And that's when equity becomes more powerful. But if you look at each of the buyers, what I'm going to show you a few more times in this section is data from the NAR. They release once a year data on consumers. Who are the buyers and who are the sellers in today's market? And so what I wanted to understand is that primary reason for purchasing a home and how it varies by age group. I would say if you look at all of the age groups, your three reasons are pride of ownership, it's matching your home size to your current life stage, and then changes with life events. We've talked about this a lot in the past. Life happens. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at those that are the millennial cohort. Their number one reason that they wanted to buy is just that desire to own a home. But the second answer is desire for a larger home. And when I saw that, my first question was, well, what does that mean? How large of a home are they looking for? Well, as you look at this data, I've outlined that same cohort. You have 1 in 5 millennials that bought a home between 1,000 and 1,500 square feet. What you should think about is you're saying, okay, well, that's not a huge home. They're looking for a larger home. Well, for millennials that are first-time buyers moving from an apartment to a home, 1,500 may feel like a palace for some people. Then you look down, though, you're finding the lion's share of those millennials moving into that 1,500 to 2,500 square feet. You can look at the table, track out those trends. I don't think anyone's surprised that you hit the peak home size for those 43 to 57. And as you get past that, you start to trend down as we talk about the move down market. But besides that desire for a home, as I was looking for the other reasons, all of those that have a star next to them are ones that might involve actual moving from a different city, moving within the city, wanting to be closer to friends or family, retiring, job relocation, better area. And so since we've last met, we have gotten new data from the Census Bureau on where we're seeing people move to. Now, I'm going to show you this data cut in 3 different ways. The first I'm going to show you is total population growth as a percent of the existing population. Where do we have more people moving in than moving out? I'm going to show you history. I'll show you the winners currently, and then the areas that are losing the most people. But let's look at history first. 2019, 2020, your top 3 states, Idaho, Arizona, Nevada. As we look at how this data has trended, you can see Idaho moved from number 1 down to number 4. South Carolina making the leap, coming in as the number 1 area where more people are moving in than moving out. Now, if you look at the bottom, you can see to the far right, New York leading the way of fewer people coming in, Louisiana, Hawaii, Illinois, West Virginia. Now, this, like I said, is domestic and international migration. And we know from talking to builders that international migration and international buyers are some of the key shoppers today. They have less sensitivity to interest rates and less sensitivity to home prices. And so you want to have a sense of, okay, well, where are international migration? Where are they moving to across the US? Same methodology, looking at it as a percent of the local market. As you track down this list, Northeast leading the way, Besides that, you have some of your traditional gateway areas. Florida coming in at 8, Texas, 9, California, 10, New York. Now, we posted this data on social media, and I didn't realize how contentious the idea of looking at a percent of the market's own growth is. So for those of you that say, well, the percent tells me nothing, show me absolutes. I gotcha. So here, what we're looking at are the areas where if you just look at absolute numbers, where have more people moved in? So this is 2019, 2020. Notice that 1 through 10 identical, both of those years. Now, the reason I don't love this metric is oftentimes when you look at this, you'll find the areas that have the largest population often tend to have the largest numbers as well. So I've listed out here our top 10 states in the country for the largest population. And as you look at the data, 4 of those 10 are among those top population growth. So as the data has progressed, we still have Texas at number 1. But as we look at this, there were a couple things that stood out to me. Let's stick to Texas. Texas, if you go back to 2019, the table on the left, Texas had about 360,000 people moving in. Fast forward to today, 473,000. So that's actually growing, where in a lot of markets, the actual rate of population is slowing. Take Arizona, for example. Back in 2019, we were talking about 130,000. Arizona now at 65,000. Still growing, but the rate of growth has come down. What I think you should also note is the markets in 2023, compare that list to your top population states. That can show you where some markets are really kind of punching above their weight with seeing more growth. If you look at the areas where we've seen more people move out based on absolutes, New York comes in again at number 1. Now California comes on the list, wasn't on the list with the percentage, Illinois, Louisiana, and Pennsylvania. Again, you can see at the top, I've put in circle of red the areas where we're losing. That's also 4 of the top 10. What was interesting, I'm not showing our millennial survey results on today's webinar. We'll talk about that at a later point in time. But one of the questions that some of you may have seen that I posed on Twitter and LinkedIn in our millennial survey was about if money didn't matter, where would people want to move across the country? And I did pull that data this morning, and it was really interesting to me. So we're saying California and New York are the top 2 places where we're seeing people move out. And yet, if money didn't matter, California and New York are the top 2 places people would want to still move to. And I think that really highlights why this discussion and this focus on affordability becomes so important, because it can change people. They may have a certain preference, but they may have to do something different than their preference based on what's happening in the market's backdrop. Now, my last slide here before I pass it to Tim is we thought it was interesting looking at each of the different cohorts, but what we can also capture is within the different age groups, who are the biggest shoppers? What group represents the largest share? So the way you should look at it is the 18 to 23. If you look over across the right, those should add up to 100. So probably no surprise. Every age group, with the exception of the youngest, married couples represents the largest share of the buyers. But know that nationwide, married couples, their share is actually at the lowest level it's been since 2010. So you say, okay, who's filling the gap? Well, we know that marriage, in particular for some of the younger cohorts, doesn't feel like this prerequisite to buying a home. And so we're actually finding for those 18 to 42, you have between 10 and 20% of all of the transactions coming from unmarried couples. Nationwide and across all groups, that's 12%. Interestingly, though, and I guess this has been a kind of a well-known data set, but I think it's interesting to see this cut by age. Single females were the second overall biggest buyer group behind married couples. And you have the youngest group, so those Gen Z that are looking to buy homes, they're more likely to have single females. Across each of the age groups, we're talking 15 to 20% of all of the buyers being single female. And look to the right of single female, single male, of single female outperforming male at every single category. And to me, this goes back to, okay, if we know that's a sizable part of the market, what does that cohort really want? What is that compelling reason why they're willing to go through with that purchase? I'd almost flip it on its head. You almost never hear this discussion of single males. Why aren't single males buying? Is there something missing in the home buying process? Is there something to increase that share as well? To me, that stands out as an opportunity. But finally, not shown here is multi-generational home ownership. It represents 14% of all of the homes purchased. And I think multi-gen housing hits two of the key themes in the housing market. One being demographics. We know that multi-gen can be helpful for either supporting aging family with having some private space or having adult children use that because of affordability. But we also know multi-gen is important because maybe you can use that private space as a rental unit to help cover the mortgage. And we also know, going back to that discussion of international migration, in other cultures, it's generally a little bit more accepted of the idea of living together. And that can also help provide some affordability relief. So I know a lot there to take in, and Tim is going to fast forward through a lot of data as well. Let me reintroduce Tim Sullivan to you guys, Zonda's Chief Advisory Officer. Most of you know Tim oversees our entire custom market study business, including population and growth studies, land residual analysis, and single family built to rent research. In fact, Tim got home late last night from Zonda's Built to Rent event in Dallas, where he emceed the entire event while also moderating two panels and delivering the opening presentation. By the way, this is after being in Las Vegas and Phoenix for work last week. As they say, no rest for the wicked. Tim, let me pass to you.
I have to embrace your if money didn't matter idea, because if it didn't, I think I would be living in Florence, Italy, and would be doing these at a different hour. So money does matter, and so does sharing the information. Ali, you said a couple things I want to repeat and then visit a couple quick questions. Your statement about, from active listings and it's different by market. Our markets are so different in so many ways, and I'm going to show an additional couple of things that makes the market different, having to do with ultimately the difference in buyers and the age of buyers. Also, want to make sure everybody had heard what Ali was saying about the traffic. Well, actually, this is where I want to go in, Ali. When we look forward and the builder attitudes right now, caution is the term of the day. But for can rates and traffic, what are we seeing on the ground? How is the consumer responding to what the builder thinks is a cautious time frame?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tim, because if you remember, during the kind of height of the market slowdown in 2022, we were talking about cancellation rates in some markets getting up to over 60%. So people were like, I'm out. I don't want to go through with this purchase. Since probably second quarter of 2023, we've seen cancellation rates normalize. We're not surprised to see 10, 15, sometimes even 20%. That's where we are today. There's nothing alarming where people are changing their mind. I think now people feel comfortable with the market and still going through with those purchases.
Right on. And I would mirror that. Certainly we're seeing that in Phoenix. It's really leveled out. It's above where the activity for traffic is above where it would have been a year ago, but below 2021 when we had the vestiges of COVID happening. That's just one example. Last thing, Ali, I love that what if that you did, the hypotheticals about price drops. If we had interest rates change and prices change and incomes change, there is some snickering on behalf of some of the pundits who chew up and spit out housing data and don't believe in all the data that you see. And oftentimes will say, oh gosh, on a real basis, prices have gone down because builders are giving incentives. With that as a backdrop, because I've often asked you, when will incentives end? And your response is when they have to. Builders will hold them as long as they need to. Do you think that when incentives go away, that base prices stay where they are now? So effectively, these outsiders would say, oh gosh, prices have actually gone up. How do we rationalize this evolution over the next year or two as we get some normalization?
Gosh, and that's so tricky because What we've found is the incentives might go away because we've seen too much margin compression and it's just not feasible to do anymore as the land basis changes and new communities come out. If we see incentives go away because the builders maybe not as in as much of a financial strong place, I think that could be a challenge because it could still leave you with the affordability issue, but the builder's ability not as strong to be able to address it. But I think if incentives go away, because you have mortgage rates come down and all of a sudden the market has at least worked a little bit towards affordability. I don't think prices necessarily have to drop, but I would say as I went through that exercise, it was like, okay, it's definitely hard to solve for this issue unless we see incomes go up a lot. So we were very early to say that prices went down in 2022, and they did, especially on the new home side. I think if we got into a really bad place again, we may see prices come down. But for now, it seems like the supply and demand is at a place that can hold prices steady.
Right on. And the other pivot we've seen the builders do is more density, smaller homes to bring down the absolute price. Ali, one last thing. We got a couple of questions that I want to make sure we address next time. Dean was asking about the impact of restarting student loan payments. We have talked about that in the past, but Dean, we will think about that and talk about it next time. And then Mark was asking about how the shape of the yield curve may change if Fed cuts the Fed funds rate. And his statement is basically, is it possible that the yield curve steepens and the 10-year bond rate goes higher, possibly pushing mortgage rates higher, or at least holding them where they are? We'll think about that, Mark. It's a great question. We'll bring it in next time. And Ali, I just wanted to make sure we put that in the parking lot. Ready to go?
Yep.
All right.
Thanks.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We are now going to answer one of the questions that Ali asked, which is basically, who are the sellers? And when you look at the sellers that are out there, notice that there's a skew towards the right. And that has to do with the fact, certainly in the resale market, things change, life changes. In fact, the reason that we'll see life changes are tenfold. Look at people move on with life changes. They get older. Some people don't move because it's a forever home. Somebody gets sick, somebody passes away, God forbid. A career change, retirement, a nicer home, a larger home, downsizing. All of these factors are real. And to me, they're irrespective of interest rates, because this is what generally creates fundamental demand. Now, look at those same factors and now look at it by age. So zero in on the green colors, because the green colors are where it's most prominent. And the closer to green, the closer to go it is. So that upper left hand you see for the younger people, move with life changes. No idea, no question there. We get a new job or get married, we move on. Look at the never moving forever home. That's a second column you'll see there. As you get older, you find your place and you don't want to leave. Also, right next to that is members' health. As we age, unfortunately, we're more likely to get sick. But look at the far right. These factors like flipping a home and other factors, for all the ages, they're not that specific. But as you look at the greens, that's where there's a focal point, and it's so very connected to age. Now, when we think about age, it's not just the age of the owner, it's the age of the housing stock. So pause on this one for a second. Look at the median age of housing stock, and these are the metros with older housing stock. And no surprise, they're the major metros. They're places where we've been building homes and people have been living for hundreds of years. And so as you look at those, you know that that's pretty typical, but there's opportunities that are implied by that. Now, here are some of the younger housing stock ages. And of course, they've been the markets that have been the boom towns. We've got Austin and Charleston and Boise. All of those have newer product. But when you look at the older product, there's a significant opportunity for new housing because of energy efficiency and technological advances. So keep in mind that older markets still have some incredible opportunities. And by the way, that's where Todd Tomilak, our director in the building product manufacturing side of the world, is paying a great deal of attention, because we anticipate that remodeling is going to move very, very quickly. Now, caution is the word of the day. Ali has said this, but we still see that 42% of builders reported that they raised prices in January, but more than half of them are sitting still. So you can look at this as half full or half empty, whichever way you like the glass. But I think this does reflect caution. And as we move into a forward look, the builders are generally expecting maybe a little bit of a bump. You know, that middle section, 56%, that's between 1 and 5%. Note that very few, 4%, are saying we expect prices to fall. And, you know, a quarter are thinking we're going to be flattened. I think that is a good reflection of the market overall. And speaking of a reflection of the market, public builders now represent more than 50% of the market. And I'll show you this in a second by market. But there's another way to look at it. Not just are we looking at public and private, but the next way is we add in the large privates. And the large privates, of course, include all the Japanese home building companies like Sumitomo, Daiwa, Sekisui House, but also Shea and Weekly, and there's a number of others. So when you start to put them in there, I think you're going to see that sector, whether we look at it as public or large private, become larger because we're also going to see more consolidation over the next few years. The smaller builders are getting pushed out. And here is an example. What we're showing you is from 2010, 2019, and 2023, the public builder share in all of these different MSAs. Notice a couple different ones. San Diego, fourth from the left. That's where everybody wants to move. Look, you know, just 10, 12 years ago, less than 20% of the market was, or about 20% of the market was controlled by the publics. Now it's 80%. Look at the far right. I think many of you might be able to remember back to 2010 in Seattle and Salt Lake. The publics weren't real prominent there. Now in Seattle, it's 50%. Salt Lake, it's pushing 30 some odd percent. So the publics are moving into these markets both organically and through acquisition. A couple things we want to make sure you're paying attention to in the rental market because it's been a whipsaw. That's the only way I can say it. When we look at what's happened to rent, a 25% rent increase since the pre-pandemic times. You can see that ramp up in 2021. Now, when we look at that, I want you to also know that there are many markets that have responded in the opposite way just recently over this last year, because over the period of time where we saw rents going up, many markets saw additional supply into those markets. And if you look across this, you can see that many of these markets are either places where we've added a great deal of product, or like the place with San Francisco, it's got a little bit of a challenge economically and politically. But not every market is feeling that. When we look at it, you can see some of the markets in the Northeast and the Midwest are posting growth. Now, we look at that definitely as these are the markets that were less volatile and didn't add as much new product. By the way, as you look across that, just keep an eye on Indianapolis, because you look at the various markets here. There's Indy. Now watch what happens when we go to the next slide. We start to look at concessions. And as we look at the concessions and what's happening, ultimately, it's not the same everywhere. Now, you might say 8% is a big number, but in speaking with Kimberly Byram, who leads our multifamily practice, she actually says that's pretty much in the wheelhouse, between 7 and 8%, which is 1 month free. That is the typical amount that is in the market. Now, which markets do we see the concessions largest? These are the markets where we have seen the most additional supply. So you can read across, you'll see Seattle, Jacksonville, all of the markets have increased over the last 3 years. Look at Indy, which is one of my favorite housing markets right now. It's been pretty stable. I like seeing that. Ultimately, we talk about the element of where we've seen the increases, but remember, it's pretty typical. And we worry about a vicious cycle. And what that ultimately is the perception and the reality of rents getting higher and then getting pushed down as people either move out or demand concessions before they will re-sign a lease. When we look at the units that are under construction in the market, we're paying a great deal of attention to the REITs. And ultimately, the REITs are acknowledging that the market has changed, but they're acknowledging that it's not the same in every market. You'll see the Camden comments, Atlanta, Austin, Charlotte. It's the places where we've had the largest amount of additional supply with new units in the pipeline, where we've had to make the most amount of shifts. And here's UDR's take on it. When you look at what UDR says, they're ultimately saying, yeah, we're getting to a place where there's negative growth and it's approximately a 3-week concession on a new lease. And as I was mentioned, Kimberly's comment, 4 weeks is not too unusual. So while the market is weakening, the perspective here, ladies and gentlemen, is the market is actually stabilizing. That's really the way we want you to think about it. It's stabilizing, and many of the regions are holding up pretty darn well. All right, so when you look at the occupancy shift, check it out. You see that downward shape, and you say, "Oh my goodness, we've gone down, 40 basis points. Oh dear." Well, look at the absolute numbers. We're almost 98%. We're now at 94%. And for the most part, that is full occupancy. We just were at a place earlier where there was too much demand and rents were going up too fast. And you look at occupancy market by market, just look across, you'll see that, most of the markets are in that 94% range, 93% range. A couple are moving down to 90%. That's where the concessions have to kick in. But keep in mind, for the consumer, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They can get more square footage for the same price or a better unit for the same price. So there's an upside here. As Ali said, we just did a 2-day event on build to rent. It was a fantastic event, 350 people from all over the country, great people there. And we shared some of these factors, ultimately what is going on in the market. And we're tracking that, by the way, through our rental housing outlook, or RHO. It's a subscription-based product. Please reach out to us if you're interested in it. Now, this is a quick snapshot of where the activity is. You can do the squint test. You can see the blues. But look at the right-hand side. That gets us right to it. Phoenix, Atlanta, Dallas, Charlotte. This is where we see active units. And of course, Phoenix has been the laboratory for this. But note that each market really has different products that are prominent. With Phoenix, you're going to see a lot of the horizontal apartments, or the sexier name is the cottage product. But Atlanta, we're going to see a mix. And then when you move down to Denver, Denver's primarily single family detached and some townhomes. So there's an array of product, and it differs by geography. When we look at what's in the pipeline, under construction, and others, keep in mind the single most important thing about the pipeline is that the units have to be financed. Because in Phoenix, it might not be 15,000 units that are financed. There might be 9,000 financed and under construction. And we're trying to dive into that to get further optics, but just always pay attention to that, which is so important right now with the market having capital markets much tighter. As we think about the REITs, the acquisition activity that they've had, whether it's been a single site or scattered site, or whole clusters that they're purchasing, they've been focusing more and more on the entry level. And that's because yields are typically better for the entry level. There's a little bit of upward movement with rent that's possible. But this shows very, very strongly how 2022 and 2023 differed. By the way, our panel with the REIT leaders, and there was Invitation Homes, Tricon, and Pretium, 3 of the 5 biggest, they're pretty positive on this next year in terms of acquisition opportunities and modest rent upgrades. And this gives you a sense of chunk rents. Keep in mind, this is what everybody's paid per month. But I want to make a note that this looks backwards, because this is stated rent, and this is what's happened during the period of time that we've been working on the rental housing outlook. But the rents are moving right, and they're moving right over time in most markets. So the next time we share this, you're probably going to see a higher percentage to the right side of that graphic. We've also been tracking what's been going on with occupancy, and notice that we're looking at build to rent, and that's all build to rent product together. So it's going to be all the product types that I've mentioned. The for rent apartment market, which is all rentals, and then Class A. And notice during COVID, look at that spike up that we saw in occupancies for build to rent. And it makes a lot of sense, because the build to rent product is more private. You typically don't have shared walls. You certainly don't have anyone living above you, and you don't have a shared hallway. Now we're getting back, kind of reverting to the mean, but there are advantages to build to rent. And because of that, there are premiums with the rent. However, concessions have peaked up a little bit, and this has everything to do with the fact that we've seen a good deal of new construction activity and new product enter the market in 2023. So when you look at the concessions in BTR, they're generally above the apartment market right now, where previously, they've been below and trended, way above way back when in the early stages of the product. But right now, this is just a supply and demand factor. We anticipate that this will come back more like the apartments are. And as I mentioned, you've got the horizontal apartments, townhomes, single family high density and single family conventional lots. We're moving more and more towards the townhome product. And I think you'll find that these are three great providers, by the way. Look at Region Properties example, Bright Sky, Watermark. This is great product. It gives square footage. You still have garages. You still have some kind of yard space. But for that median place where an owner and operator can find the best yields, we're seeing this product become the most prominent. Now, a couple final thoughts we'd like to share with you. There are there are some animal lovers out there, and in fact, I think you've heard before, Allie is a cat owner and she loves her cats. And I have to tell you, Allie, after I read about Binks, the black cat, who saved Oakley the puppy by attacking some coyotes that were biting this dog, I suddenly had a little bit different perspective on cats. The hero cat, by the way, Binks is a black cat, and you can see this Oakley dog is a little puppy. But felines are not the only animals that can be heroes. There is a dog whose name is Axel. He's a 1 year old border collie who was bugging his parents, the adult parents, wouldn't get off their bed, barking at them, and finally led them to their son's bedroom, Gabriel. And this 17-year-old had had a stroke. And because the dog got the parents to the young man, he was able to get medical attention and he's feeling great. Love reading about that. Now, if you are a baseball fan or any type of sporting fan, you might know who Todd Helton is. He was a retired Colorado Rocky guy, great ball player. But he was inspired by a friend of his who went to the University of Tennessee, like he did. The gentleman's name is Ryan Jamonville, and he's a rather wealthy guy. And Ryan put $100 million into a fund in Florida to release some of the medical expenses for people in Florida because medical expenses are often the top cause of bankruptcy. In fact, they're the top cause of bankruptcy in the US. So Todd Helton decided he would take a little bit of his wealth. He's put 10 million in so far to release medical debt for Coloradans. I love that kind of stuff. And congratulations to Todd Helton. Now, one of the things that you heard us talk about earlier is aging. And our behaviors our behaviors are different by age. How we buy is different, and also what happens to our body is different. And this Canadian swimmer, Betty Russell, is 99 years old, and she now holds 3 world records for seniors in terms of 3 different types of swimming. And her attitude is, I just get in the pool and I just keep swimming. 1 foot in front of the other, or in this case, maybe one arm in front of the other. Very inspirational. And the next is another 90-year-old. This gentleman's 92 years old. His name is Alfredo Aliaga Burchio. And he's the oldest person to hike the Grand Canyon rim to rim. And he quickly states that when he turned 76, he started living a healthy lifestyle. So by 92, he's a great athlete. So, maybe there's hope for me after all. And my last point is kind of a playful one, but a 13-year-old boy who goes by the name of Blue Scooty is the first human being to beat Tetris. Now, the reason I point this out is that I'd almost say the only product that ever beat Tetris before was an AI bot. So there is hope for the human brain when you've got a 13-year-old like this that can do something that only bots can do. Congratulations, young man. All right, we're going to talk about our last factor. And our last factor is always inspiration. And I have to give Allie Wolf a little help here, or a little shout out, because she and I were talking about a variety of people and a variety of inspirations. And she mentioned this one. I did a little bit of research, and I'm going to have to admit she's got a point there. Oh, wait. No, it's not Travis Kelce, even though I love him. And I am a Kansas City Chiefs fan, having been born there. But yep, you figured it out. Taylor Swift. Now, let me be specific. This has nothing to do with her politics or her love life. It has to do with the fact that this young woman is an economic juggernaut. And based on the average concert attendance, Swift's fans have spent about 93 million per show. So when you add that up for that Eras tour that she's been doing, it's $5.7 billion to the country's economy. $5.7 billion. Now, just in California, the California Center for Jobs and the Economy, they estimated there was a $320 million increase in LA's gross domestic product. Really, it's a gross metropolitan product. The creation of 3,300 jobs and $160 million of local revenue to the local market. And then don't forget about the fact that Google Trends has been watching what's going on with Taylor, and the searches for Kansas City have more than doubled over the last 3 months. That's great news for Kansas City. The search interest for restaurants that she goes to have doubled, and even flights where Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift have gone, the search for flights have gone up. So this is a mind-boggling event, and everything that I've seen about her as a human being is she's actually pretty kind too. Wealthy, worthy of incredible economic impact, and a kind person. I'll take that any day. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the top of the hour. We appreciate all your questions. We appreciate all you being here. Keep the questions coming. Allie and I send our regards. And also on behalf of the Westwood Insurance Agency, who are great sponsors today, thank you for being here. Take care, everybody. Stay safe and talk to you soon.